Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth George, Director of Member Engagement and Chapter Development, and I am really excited to welcome you to today's webinar, There Must Be 50 Ways to Raise Some Money. Before I introduce our moderator, as always, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping notes. This is being recorded, and once we have edited it and uploaded it to our YouTube channel, we will post it on our website under the Education tab. We have a drop-down menu that says AGO Webinars, and you will be able to find it there along with a wonderful handout that John Dixon will be providing. You're muted, but we do want to hear from you, and you can post questions in the Q&A box, or you can comment. And actually, I'm not going to say any more because at this point, what I'd like to do is to introduce our moderator, and that is AGO's Executive Director, James E. Thomashower. James, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Elizabeth, and it's great to be with you. Great to be with all of you who are coming on to enjoy this wonderful webinar that John Dixon is presenting. There must be 50 ways to raise some money. John Dixon has been known as an AGO leader for many years. He has been a regional convention coordinator. He is serving now as our treasurer and counselor for finance and development. John is himself an executive director of a nonprofit, the Academy of Music in Virginia. And John and I talk about fundraising every week. There's not a week that goes by that we don't have discussions about fundraising and ways to raise some money. I want to let this go over to John as quickly as I can, but I want to remind you that you're welcome to ask any questions, and John will answer them in the midst of the conversation. Just go into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, click on it, put a question there and in writing, and I will pose it to John, or you can put something in the chat if you like. So John welcomes opportunities to hear questions from the audience at any time. And with the theme that it's time to raise some money, honey, I'm going to turn it over to John Dixon. John.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon to all of you who are giving up your precious time to attend this webinar. So let me start by telling you what this webinar is not about. And it is not about budgeting and balancing the books of your chapter. There will be a separate webinar about that taking place on June the 14th at 5 p.m. and given by my colleague Jeff Kylan. So I'd encourage you all to, if you're taking notes, the first thing to do is to write down June the 14th at 5 p.m. to learn about the budgeting process. Budgeting is all about money coming in and money going out. But what we're talking about today is how do you raise money when you're looking at your budget and you are deciding that you need some more money to accomplish your goals. So you want to expand your budget, you have to raise some money. This is not an easy subject to discuss for organists. I remember when I was preparing for my regional convention in 2009. So this would have been about 2007. We handed out a questionnaire to all the people who showed up at the first meeting who were ready and willing to take part in our convention. And every single one of them wrote down that they wanted to be absolutely involved in the program committee. And then at the bottom, just about everybody wrote, but I do not want to raise money. I mean, this was not a question of telling me what they were willing to do. They were very blunt about what they were not going to do. And so I concluded pretty quickly that organists as a group, and they're not unusual, have some trouble raising money. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And because it can be a rather dry subject, I have enlisted the help of Paul Simon, even though he doesn't know it. And I have tinkered with the text to his very famous song, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Now, those of you who know this song, I hope that's all of you. And if you don't, you can look it up on YouTube afterwards. But you will recall that the beginning of the soundtrack includes a snare drum that gives this little ostinato pattern that continues through the piece. And I thought, we really need a snare drum. And I wonder if James can play the snare drum for me. And I am so disappointed to tell you, first of all, that James Thomashower actually does have a snare drum, but he has the very feeble excuse that it's currently in storage. So this is why we're not having our executive director play the backing track for the rewritten version of 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, which is now called 50 Ways to Raise Some Money. So here we go with the beginning. You're just going to have to imagine James there playing on his snare drum, which I'm sure will haunt us for the rest of the day. But here we go. The problem is all inside your head, she said to me, and is easy to resolve if you don't need stuff for free. I'd like to help you build a fortune, don't you see? There must be 50 ways to raise some money. She said, it's really not my habit to intrude. Furthermore, I hope my talking of your assets isn't rude, but I'll repeat myself at the risk of being crude. There must be 50 ways to raise some money. 50 ways to raise some money. So let me stop with the text and have a little interjection. And this is what I'll do as we go through. I'll talk a little bit. And if you have any questions that James spots, he can ask me as we're going. The thing that I get from these first two stanzas is that the writer of this text really has no clue what is going on. And that is true for all of us when we start thinking about raising money. I mean, nobody goes to college to earn a degree in raising money for nonprofits. It's just not one of those things on your radar screen as being worthy of education, but you have to learn about it. And so eventually, certain people fall into the position where they find they have to raise money to keep an organization going. They have no choice. And then, well, what are they going to do? And it turns out the way to learn is to ask for advice from people who've done it before. This is true in my case. 18 years ago, I came to the Academy of Music in Norfolk, Virginia. The organization was nearly bankrupt. I needed to raise some money. And fortunately, I had a development director on staff who gave me some very good training, which is actually going to be part of what I'm talking to you about today. I also recall meeting someone who was a professional fundraiser, who was a retired Navy guy. We have a lot of those in Norfolk, Virginia. And he told me that it took him about 2 years in the fundraising business before he really knew what was going on. And so he told me, John, if you work at it within a couple of years, you will learn what to do. And I have to say he's right. I think at this point, I've raised between $7.5 and $10 million for various organizations, which is maybe $500,000 a year, not an incredible amount of money actually in this field. There's been a lot of hard work. It's been a long journey. And so I'm now speaking to all of you who are interested to find out what is involved in raising money. The first message I have today is really this takes some time. So the first point I always make is the best time to start raising money is yesterday. And of course, you can't do that. So today's probably a good day to do that. And you're investing your time in attending this webinar. So you have to understand it's going to take time to learn to raise money, and you're going to have to rely on advice of people around you. But I'm here to tell you that it is possible if you can overcome your fears and learn some things and find the people to ask. And if you have a good mission to your organization, then you too will be able to learn to raise money. So let's carry on here and find out about some of these ways. You just pick up a sack, Jack. Empty the can, Stan. Or sell off a toy, Roy. You're not bothering me. Default on a loan, Joan. You might stick up a bank, Frank. or start selling pot, and hope you stay free. Ooh, stick out your hat, Pat. Borrow from Gran, Dan. Have a big sale, Dale. You just listen to me. Pick up a buck, Chuck. Start betting on games, James. Find stuff to pawn, Fawn. Then go on a spree. Okay, we'll take a little break there while you digest the fact that none of these seems like a very good way to raise money. And so this is when I give you the disappointing news that unfortunately there are not 50 ways to raise some money. So I'm now going to wait about 10 seconds for those of you who feel you were lured here and under false pretenses to check out and go and do something else. But if you feel there's some value in finding out what the ways might be, then stay tuned and we'll carry on. So let me just ask James, have you seen anything pop up in the Q&A yet, James?
Not yet. People are fascinated by what you have to say, John, and more people are coming in. So carry on.
Okay, so I hope the people who are just arriving are not too disappointed to find out that there are not, in fact, 50 ways. So the real way to ask for money is to ask in person. The first thing that I was taught, and you can write this down, is that people give to people. So if you're seeking to raise money, it's a very personal activity. You have to build connections, you have to take time, and it's really, really important that you find people whose charitable giving objectives align with the mission of your organization. I'm probably going to say that a few times because I say it all the time. As you have probably figured out by now, I did not grow up in Norfolk, Virginia. I grew up in England and came here some 30 years ago. First time I came was 40 years ago. And charitable fundraising in America is unlike anywhere else that I've ever experienced. Americans, I have to tell you, are very generous people. And if you're looking to raise money, there are probably people who are looking to support what you're doing. These people might have foundations, or they might have personal wealth that they would like to see put to action in certain areas. But they don't want to be talking to people who are trying to get money out of them for purposes that they don't truly support. So a very important message for all of you is that what you should seek to do is to find people who have the means to support what you're doing and have aligned interests with the mission of your organization. So that means that you need to know the mission of your organization, and you have to be able to articulate it. And I could do this, but I'm going to ask James to do it because I've asked him and he's done it before. James, what is the mission of the American Guild of Organists?
Put me on the spot. It's to foster a thriving community of musicians who share their knowledge and inspire passion for the organ.
That is absolutely it. And I knew I could ask you to do that because I know that you live that mission every day. As our executive director, you live the mission every day. And once you meet someone whose philanthropic objectives align with the mission of our organization, then there should be no reason for fear whatsoever in the conversation, because you can really have an enjoyable conversation with the person who's on the other side. So on the other hand, if you're talking to someone and you figure out that that person's charitable giving objectives are not aligned with your mission, then the sensible thing to do is not to try to persuade the person in your direction. It's much better to say something like, you know, sounds to me like you're more interested in an organization like the food bank, and a friend of mine is involved with the food bank. Would you like me to make an introduction? You're going to make more long-term friends by not bucking not fighting the fact that you're going to be successful asking for money if you're talking to people who want to support the mission of your organization. All right, so let's carry on a little bit with the next part of Paul Simon's text. She said, "It grieves me that your chapter's in such pain. There might be something I could do to make it great again." I said, "I appreciate that, and would you please explain about the 50 ways?" She said, "Why don't we just both sleep on it tonight? And I believe in the morning, you'll begin to see the light." And then she frisked me, and I realized she probably was right. There must be 50 ways to raise some money. 50 ways to raise some money. Okay, so obviously things are not turning out the way our writer had expected, and this raises the issue of integrity. And over the long term, you have to make sure that you honor all the obligations that you make to your donors. If you go to a donor and ask for money for a specific purpose, later on, you have to be able to go back and say, "Thank you for your gift. We spent it exactly the way you intended, and here are the results." So that would be what we call a restricted gift. The donor gives it to you with a specific purpose stated along with the gift. The other kind of gift would be an unrestricted gift, when the donor says, "Well, I'm going to give you this money and I trust your judgment to use it the right way." It's very important to have gifts like that from organization, because we have to keep the lights on, and you'll find out very quickly that donors don't find that very appealing. So a lot of people will like to give money for specific purposes if they have interests in a certain area. But there are other donors who understand that the long-term health of an organization does depend on running a sensible operating budget, and they're quite willing to make contributions to help with that. In fact, if you give to the annual fund every year, that's the sort of giving that you are doing. So the matter of integrity is really important, because the moment you do something that is not according to the wishes of the donor, at some point the donor is going to find out, and then your entire credibility collapses. And it's not just for that particular gift, it's for all the other gifts. So again, one of the things I cannot overemphasize is that it's really important to tell people what you're going to do it, and then to tell them that you've done it, all the while heaping plenty of thanks on them for making it possible, because that way your donors will get a really good feeling about what they're accomplishing through their philanthropy, and they'll be very pleased to continue a discussion about what to do next. And I've had that experience with our own local Tidewater chapter of the AGO. We have a retired executive who likes to bring top concert artists to town, and he underwrites pretty much the whole program. So we've had people like Olivier Latry and Hector Oliveira and Raul Prieto Ramirez, and then Raul with his wife, and Carol Williams, and we have Organized Rhythm coming this year. And every time we have a successful event, then our donor gets all excited about what we're going to do next year. So it becomes, once you get a program in place, cultivating that is really important. Now that is all well and good as you go year by year, but eventually things change, people pass away. And so when we think about fundraising, we actually think about three areas. One area is the annual fund that supplies the operating budget. One area is endowment giving, where an organization can build endowments, and then the revenue from those endowments goes into the operating budget. And the third area is planned giving, which is where people make bequests in their wills and money comes to the organization upon passing. Now, in mentioning those, I have just put before you really the entire scope of raising money. And that's a very big scope. It's really, if I start getting into the details of all of these things, we'll be here for a long, long time. So I just want you to be aware of those three areas. I think we can talk a little bit more about them in the question and answers, but let me just carry on with, did you have a question there, James?
I have a question before you carry on, if you don't mind. First, if I may, in a very friendly, collegial way, challenge you for a second. You said there were three approaches: annual fund, and then endowment, which is permanently restricted, and then planned giving. But you also mentioned earlier on restricted gifts as another approach to giving, where people say, I want to give you a gift that you need to use for a specific purpose. So really, maybe there are four different types of giving?
No, because let's say you have three vehicles. You have a convertible, and then you have a truck, and you have a minivan. So those are the three modes of transport. And the idea of the restricted gift is, are you going to paint your convertible silver or black? Or because the restriction can apply to any gift. So I don't know if Tony Thurman is listening in on this webinar. If he is, the first thing I'm going to do is give him a shout out on behalf of all guild members, because he has been working long and hard for the guild, and we are currently seeing the fruits of his labors of over really, I think it's close to 25 years. And I mention this because I told you at the beginning, this is a process that takes time. And the worst time to go to people to ask for help is when you desperately need help, because your donors can smell fear and they do not want to give money to an organization. I just got a little note from Tony. So hi, Tony, thank you very much. But donors do not want to give to an organization that might not be around next year. That's one of the things that we all learn. So if you're planning on learning to raise money, take the time to do it now, so that when an emergency comes, you're already down the road. It's virtually impossible. It's not impossible because I have to say, I think I did it. I went to people when we were close to collapsing, and somehow, thanks to some extraordinary people, we did manage to pull through. But in thanking Tony, what I'm pointing out is that the Guild is very fortunate to have a very long-serving development director who has worked steadily over a long period of time. And so what any person who is new to this, to fundraising, should take away from this is, oh my goodness, there's a long road ahead. But I don't want to be discouraging in any way at all, because I also want you to feel that you can take some steps down this road and see where it takes you. I have a couple of, I have one story in particular for the end, if we have time, because the AGO has gone to some pretty extraordinary places. But so James, I hope that answers your question, that the restricted can happen for an annual gift, because someone can send Tony a check for the annual fund and say, oh, by the way, I really want this to be used for new music, and Tony will write a thank you letter, and because money gets commingled, he can make an honest statement that yes, this will be used for that purpose. Or someone can send a check for the AGO endowment and it will be put there. Or somebody might just make a bequest that is not designated, and then the AGO has to, we actually have a policy as to how we will do that, as you know, James. So does that answer your question? Really, I do think there are three legs to the stool. And that's really important, because if a stool has only two legs, it's going to fall over. You really need those three. And you have to learn about all of them.
A related question, if I may. How do you find donors?
Yes, well, you don't just walk out on the street and say, hey, anybody want to give us some money? So, that might need a separate webinar, James, one day. But let me try to give a simple answer to that. Just thinking about it, I would say there are two kinds of donors. There are voluntary donors, and there are people who have to give away money. And the people who have to give away money, for example, might have set up a charitable trust. There are various quite sophisticated financial instruments that wealthy people get advice on. And they might be told to place $100,000 in a charitable trust with Fidelity, which means that they can take a big tax deduction in the year that they set it up. But then they have a trust, and that trust has an obligation to distribute funds. So they need to give away money. And then the other people are the people who have liquid assets, but are not bound to make donations. So you look everywhere you can for people in both categories. In the individual category, a lot of development directors have done this. They've gone to the local symphony, and instead of looking to see what music is on the program, they've gone to the back of the program to see the list of donors, and there, conveniently, is a list of all the people who support the arts in your area. And then you start thinking, well, do I know any of those people, and how do I meet some of those people? So you need to have a plan on meeting the individuals who can voluntarily give, and then you also have to find the people who have to give. Now, a number of those individuals will be connected through what is called your local community foundation. And I would say that the local community foundation would be my first choice of a first stop for anyone who is trying to learn about raising money. So for example, in my area, we're in the southeast corner of Virginia. The area is known as Hampton Roads. Nobody really knows what Hampton Roads means or where it is. But we have an organization called the Hampton Roads Community Foundation. And within that foundation, we have about $400 million of assets. Those assets are managed for us. Anybody who has a fund with the foundation doesn't have to worry about managing the assets or what return you get. They set up a distribution policy, and so that there could well be organizations. I'll tell you, there is one fund within the Hampton Roads Community Foundation that is specifically for supporting music. And so in my role running a music school, I make an application, and we've received a very significant grant for this year from that fund. So, but the important thing is that the staff at the Community Foundation are there to serve donors and recipients of the grants. And so they will be very open to talking to you, and usually you can call and make an appointment and go in and sit down and say, I'm brand new at fundraising, and I understand that you might have some donor advised funds that align with the mission of my organization. And then the person you're talking to will give you much more helpful information than I can give right now answering this question. But is that a good start, James?
I think that's a good start, John. Tony put a nice note up in the chat a moment ago, maybe you saw it. He said that another good place to start is with the members of your own board, your own executive committee. It's always good for the leaders to begin by making donations themselves. And then it's much easier to ask for money if you've made a donation yourself. I know, Tony and I and you, we have all made commitments to the AGO, not only for plan giving, but we make annual gifts to the AGO. And it's much easier to have any conversation about fundraising if you yourself have made a commitment and have made a regular donation to your chapter.
So let me tell you how that works. My music school, I wrote a grant to the Norfolk Arts Commission, and in 10 days' time, I have to defend that grant, which means I'm going to get on a Zoom meeting and they're going to ask me questions, and I will tell them what we're doing. And we've had a grant from them for many, many years. So this is a recurring thing, and they always ask me certain things. And one of the things they're going to ask me is, what percentage of your board contributes financially to the organization? And there is only one possible answer to that question. It has to be, of course, 100%, because donors are going to say, listen, if your own board isn't committed enough to make a contribution, then why should you look to me to make a contribution? So Tony is exactly right. Now, this is where you get into some of the subtleties of fundraising. There are some organizations that have what they call a give or get amount, which means they tell all their board members, you are responsible for handing in a check for $500 every year of your service. And we don't care if you raid your son's piggy bank to do it, but we want $500 if you're going to be on our board. That's called give or get. I favor a different way. I ask my board to contribute something every year in accordance with their means and with their commitment to the organization. And I don't have.
I do want to just ask, and I'm sure James is going to post this, but someone commented that's all well and good on the national level, but what do we do for our smaller chapters? How do we go about this? Where do we seek? And many of us may not have the opportunities or the funding to be able to donate to our own chapter.
Right. Well, when we were running the convention in the Mid-Atlantic Convention, every person who was on the steering committee made a modest gift. I mean, this could be a $25 gift. It does not have to be a $500 or $1,000 gift. It's for the board level, it's the idea that the people who are serving the organization are financially committed. And then that is the springboard for seeking larger dollars. So if you have a group in leadership of your chapter, the same principle applies. It can apply at a much smaller level. And so what I was saying when you asked that question is that by asking my board members to contribute according to their means and their commitment to their service, I see a wide variety of gifts. I have one wealthy doctor who gives $5,000. I have one young former student of the academy who's like our board member of the future, but he's serving on the board, and he makes a gift of $50, and that counts. I mean, that absolutely counts as much as the $5,000. So my advice would be to the chapters: don't be scared by any of the things we're talking about. They can operate at the chapter level just as much as at the national level. And in fact, they might even be easier to accomplish at the chapter level because you know one another. At the national level, we're coming together from all around the country. It takes time to get to know one another. But Tony raised a really good point about board members do have to contribute.
John, we have a question from an individual who says, how can this be, this is a kind of follow-up on what Elizabeth just asked, and it's really about the community foundation aspect of it. The member asks, how can it be spun down to a small chapter in flyover country? Would a local chapter be able to find local community foundations everywhere? Would we need to tie back to national in any way?
Well, I don't know what is set up to tie back to national, but yes, this is a big country. I've driven across it. I know there are cities, with lots of wealth, and you can drive through farmland where you just don't see many people. So I'm also learning. This is my first year as treasurer. I'm learning that we have chapters that are well endowed and have assets that they built up over many years. And we have small chapters that have just formed and might have 10 members. And of course, the challenge is, being a 10-member chapter, is that it's going to be hard work to raise significant dollars. But what I'm trying to describe here are the principles that everybody would follow. So, I mean, if
John,
I
if I
work,
can jump in, I'm
Yeah.
going to jump in. I think that question was more about the community foundations, focusing on whether indeed there are enough community foundations in America to service chapters
well,
far flung.
all I can say is that I was having a conversation with one chapter leader. James and I were having a conversation with one chapter leader a couple of weeks ago, and I said, the community foundation is a good, it's the first place to look. And the person said, well, how do I find that? And I said, well, Google community foundation. And we found a community foundation headquartered 10 miles from where he was sitting. Now, this was in an urban area. So, I mean, I'm not saying that if you're in the middle of, of the farm belt that you're going to have that available to you, but then you have to change your frame of thinking. So you might look at the local churches and see who are known as the community leaders through their involvement with the churches, because those people would be more likely to have an appreciation for music, and so you might get the alignment of the philanthropic objectives with the mission of your organization. So,
Right. John, one of the people putting the participants here, forgive me for interrupting, but put in a chat the fact that the next town over might have a community foundation, even if your town doesn't. And the next town over might have a foundation that's willing to have a broader regional reach than just a local community. So look for community foundations that are not necessarily in your immediate community, but might be a little further out, because they might be willing to serve your community, even though you're not exactly in the town.
That is really true. And I will say that I've been able to do that. Working in my organization in Norfolk, I've been able to get support from neighboring cities. But I'll tell you what I've not had success with, and that is applying to major national foundations. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That is, I don't think I'm going to live long enough to tackle that one. I really feel that for what we're involved in, giving is very locally based, so that closer to home you can look, probably the more fruitful your search will be. So let's try the last few ideas here from our songwriter. Sell off a stock, Jock, or liquidate art, Bart. Divest real estate, Nate. That must be tax-free. Pursue alimony, Tony. Take gold from the mint, Clint. Give Bitcoin a try, Sly. And go on a spree. Put swag in a sack, Mac. Just take what you like, Spike. Find something to forge, George. You just listen to me. Start selling short, Mort. Test bootlegging gin, Jim. Try melting down lead, Ed, and hope you stay free. So that's the end of the wacky ideas for raising money, most of which I hope you never get to try. But I think the process can be summarized in this last little stanza, because you need to remember it takes time. You need to build personal connections, and believe me, you can do it. So, as Paul Simon himself might have put it, develop a plan, Stan, then build it up slow, Mo, and finish up strong, John, to bring in the green. So that's my thinking about how you can learn to raise some funds. And I could hear in the questions, some people saying this is not as easy as he's making it sound. I'm not trying to make it sound easy. I'm just telling you that you can do it, but the key is to work, is that people give to people. And the other thing that's very important is that you can't take rejection personally, because if somebody says, I'm not going to give you any money, it doesn't mean that they don't like you or they don't think that your organization is worthwhile. It just means they prefer to support something else. So the way it was put to me was, some will, some won't. So what? Move on. So if you're getting involved in the fundraising process, don't let it get to you personally. Take your time, have a plan, look for donors, seek advice. Now, I have to say, I'm easy to find because all my contact information is in the front of every TAO. And if any of you want to contact me for a one-on-one conversation, that's what I'm here to do. So with that, I'll ask James if there are any further questions.
We do. We have a question from an attendee. Do you have creative suggestions for fundraising avenues that will help us build up our scholarship fund beyond annual recitals and invitations on the website and newsletter?
Okay, so this addresses the area of fundraising events, really, and you can do various events like golf tournaments, and my organization has done golf tournaments in the past, but really they involve a lot of work, and you have to get a very committed committee to make them happen. And I think that rather than fundraising through events, it's the idea of looking for individuals outside your organization, rather than saying, okay, that gets back to some of the things that were in this text, pass around the hat pack and things like that. So unless you have some really committed people, an organization like an AGO chapter, I think, is going to have a hard time raising funds by doing events. I think the best thing for you to do is to look for grant sources or gifts.
All right. John, we got another comment from John Payne, one of the panelists, who suggests that organists might actively participate in the fundraising efforts for their own church's new organ or restoration or rebuild, and thereby get to know the community involved in doing the fundraising, get to know some people, and that's a good way to just become more aware of different people involved in fundraising.
Right. So that's an excellent idea, but it does also, there's sort of a red flag that raises there, because a lot of churches might have a family that contributes the lead gift to install a new organ. And these days that could be $1 million gift. Right? There are plenty of churches with families who can stroke $1 million check. And so the organ goes in and it has the family's name on there. And so the temptation is to say, wow, Mr. Smith and his family must be logical people to support the AGO chapter. So you have to be very sensitive that you don't just go barging right in and upset a lot of people very quickly, because that could be counterproductive. You could find yourself unable to build those connections for a long time. You're more likely to see that with things like, I remember a friend of mine teaches at a private school, and she needed she was hoping to get a new grand piano, And I said, well, why not try to, you've got lots of wealthy families, why not ask a family to contribute the piano? And she said, I can't do that because we have a development department and all fundraising for the school has to go through the fundraising department. So you have to be very sensitive to where conflicts might arise. And in this particular case, the church is not going to be very happy if they realize that one of their wealthy members is now getting bothered with requests to give money. So it obviously it's a place to look. I think the question actually was phrased more in the way of building relationships, which I absolutely support. And so, for example, the person who gave the organ might also be willing to underwrite the fee to bring in a top-notch artist to play a recital once a year. So it's a question of being very tactful in how you establish those connections. But that's exactly the way that over time you can reach a very, to use a musical term, you can reach a sort of a harmonious state of affairs. But it's going to quickly become discordant if you think, I need to raise money, I need to raise it quickly. So-and-so gave the organ at that church, I'm going to call him and ask him for a gift. And it just doesn't work that way.
And I've got another question or comment really from Gordon Rowley, who writes, we have had considerable success with free will offerings at our programs. Without in-person events during the pandemic, this source of support almost vanished. Yeah. Giving online generated a few donations, but nothing close to the amount gained through offerings. Do you have any advice for online giving?
Stay away from it. I know that's not the answer you wanted to hear, but I share that feeling. Going back to the free will offering at a live event, that is very worth doing. In particular, because it can save you having to sell tickets. And when you sell tickets, then usually you have to pay admissions sales tax to the city that you're in. In other words, you can open a whole can of worms by selling tickets to an event. A free will offering is an ideal way to collect money when you have a live event. And this has been one of the big challenges. Remember that I told you early on, people give to people. That's why, there are people around at these live events. That's why people put money in the free will offering plate. It's a very personal thing to do. And that's why it's such a challenge to get online giving. And what I hear is a lot of people saying, oh, the world of fundraising is all going to migrate online and people are going to do GoFundMe programs. And that's not going to work for us. If you're a little island in the Caribbean and you get hit with a hurricane, then there's going to be an outpouring of general support, and something online is going to be a good way to collect those funds. But for us working at the local level, it's all down to people. So my advice there would be to get back to in-person events as quickly as possible and get that free will offering plate out, because truly people will respond to that in a way they will not respond online.
John, I've got a comment here from a participant who says, is there any guidance or limits on expenses or gifts spent towards fundraising or donor engagement? For example, lunch with a donor, travel costs, de minimis gifts, etc.
That's an interesting question. Some organizations have policies. Some people stay clear of accepting anything. I had a cup of coffee with my local city councillor and she wouldn't even let me pay for the cup of coffee. And so I think you meet people where they are, and that I think your organization needs a policy. If it's a very small organization, I don't think you need to spend much time or effort on it. In general, you have to be able to pass the smell test. I mean, there's nothing wrong with paying for lunch with a with a donor when you're meeting to discuss a gift. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's a question of, in the accounting world, there's something called the principle of materiality. Is it big enough to bother, to be worth bothering about? And so if you're just doing very minor things, I wouldn't worry about that at all. But you would know if you were trying to bribe someone, so just don't do it.
I've got a comment I'd like to suggest to everyone who's listening. One of the reasons I think the AGO has been so successful over many years now in establishing many different scholarship programs, getting our Clarence Dickinson Society going, establishing funding for various scholarships, is simply to have a presence that's very visible all the time. Tony Thurman has been our Director of Development and Communications. He's on the website. People can find him. People do find him. And he's a steady presence for development and fundraising for the AGO, and has been for 2 decades. So I would recommend to a chapter that if you can establish a steady presence with a person who is a fundraiser or who's doing the fundraising function on an ongoing basis, that would be helpful, because that way everybody in the chapter and anybody who might want to help the chapter would know who to go to reliably and consistently. And of course, that person needs to be responsive and cooperative and friendly and a good listener. So again, people give to people. It's good to have a person at the chapter who is the face of the fundraising activity of the chapter and is not afraid to do it, not afraid to be the face and be the person that is the go-to person.
So I would support that entirely, James. And I would also say that Tony's longevity with the AGO is something that we can be very grateful for, because development directors are a bit like organists. If somebody pinches your development director, the best way to fill that position is to pinch somebody else's. And of course, being an organist is highly vocational, and being a development director turns out to be more of a career path. And there are plenty of development directors who are simply waiting for the next phone call so that they can go off and raise money for another organization. And so one of the things that separates the successful fundraising organizations is whether you actually have consistency in the leadership, consistency in the people who are building those and maintaining those relationships. So again, thanks to Tony for his long service. It's not just his service, it's his long service. And if you as a chapter are looking to start this process, what James said makes a whole lot of sense, that you need to have someone who becomes known as the person to talk to. And it's not because someone's going to walk out and take out a checkbook and stroke a big check. It's just they might want to talk to that person to understand what's going on, and then the dividends will flow later on.
If I might add, John, we did a program about almost 3 weeks ago where the focus of it really was chapters collaborating with other chapters, but one chapter talked about the outreach initiatives that they did. And I think for chapters to be successful, whether it's recruitment or whether it's growing their funds, it's looking beyond their chapter walls. And it, as you said, having a presence at other arts organizations. I was talking with a chapter about perhaps there's a food bank or something that is highly recognized in your community. You might want to do a recital for them and just brand your chapter and bring more awareness into the community of the value that you're bringing. And through that and the relationships that develop, and again, you don't want to steal their sponsors, but there's an opportunity, I think, looking beyond and looking at other people, arts organizations or outreach initiatives that resonate deeply with people, where there would be an opportunity for a chapter to gain awareness of the value that they bring of organists.
And then look for some synergies. So for example, the local university, not a lot of universities are offering organ majors these days, but if you have a local university, the local organist could work together with the university to provide some scholarship assistance, or to have the students come and play recitals for the chapter, or something like that. So I think the essential comment that you were making, Elizabeth, is look outside the walls of your chapter, right? You're actually looking outside your chapter for support. And so the more that you show that you're willing to share with the community, the better the response will be from the community. Life is a two-way street. You can't just go around asking, and you can't just go around giving. Now, I was talking earlier about these foundations, these funds, community foundations, where donors have to give a certain amount of money away because it's required by the tax code. They got a tax write-off before, and then they have to distribute a certain amount of money. And the first thing I learned when I came to the Academy of Music in Norfolk was it's very hard to raise money. Today it's been all about it's hard, but it's not impossible. The second thing that I found is it's very hard to give money away. You know, we give a lot of money in scholarships, but we have a scholarship committee and we get a lot of information about the applicants and we get to know these people. So keep in mind that there are people who have the challenge of giving away money and they want to see it be put to the best possible purpose. They have to give it away for tax reasons, but they also want to see that it's making the maximum impact in the community. So if you can offer them something that really makes a difference in the community, then you're going to have a long-term source of funding. You have to know what you're asking for. You have to have a program. You have to be specific, but then people will, you invite them in and they'll come.
I'd
We
like to
are
add
about
on
the
that.
5-minute mark at the end of this program. So I know, John, you had a story you wanted to tell. Do you have time to tell it?
Yeah, sure. James, did you have a comment before we do that?
I did. Thank you. A couple of years back, quite a few years back, there was a fellow named John Polo, very brilliant, interesting fellow, who was involved in a chapter in Connecticut. And I don't remember exactly which one, and I don't want to get it wrong. But that chapter had a major scholarship program. And one of the ways they raised money for scholarship, for that scholarship program, as I recall, is that during Halloween, they invited all of the local schools to come to the church for a Halloween spooktacular concert. And the local school, it was the choirs. They were inviting choirs from different churches. So they had many different sets of parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles coming to the church, making contributions at the door of the church or at the door of, to support the event, while it was the chapter was hosting the event. And chapter members dressed up in Halloween costumes, and they played the organ, of course, and it was a fantastic, spectacular success. They did year after year. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but they did it for year
that was
after
the
year.
Bridgeport chapter. Thank you, Tony.
Bridgeport. Right. There we go. Thank you. So that was what I wanted to mention in terms of community outreach. This was totally beyond the scope of the chapter's members itself. They were working with the different schools, the different high schools in the community, and doing an event that just brought hundreds of people into this church for an event that everybody enjoyed and got a lot of publicity for the chapter and raised money for the chapter for scholarships. Thank you.
Right, so this story takes a little while to tell, but I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version, because this area that we've been talking about is vast, and what you're trying to do here is sort of dip your toe in, and there are just the most amazing things that you're going to find. You're going to make friends doing this. There are going to be people that you will value, who make a difference to your organization, and you will find things that you could not imagine. So the AGO has been through this. The AGO was left some land in Northwest Mississippi by a gentleman. And when he died, nobody at the AGO knew anything about it. And well, Tony, I'm going to hear from Tony about this, because I'm sure Tony knew all about it. But Tony, you'll just have to give me some license on the story here. So what happened was that some sharky lawyer noticed that real estate taxes were owed on the land, and he paid the real estate taxes and claimed the land. And then another good-hearted lawyer in town found out what was going on and came to James and said, well, we can go to court and try to get this money back. And so James said, well, I'm all ready to come down to Northwest Mississippi to take part in the court case. And the nice lawyer said, James, you don't understand. We're in the deep South here. We got to do things a little differently. What I need is an organist to come and speak in front of the judge. So James said, oh, well, we'll ask the chapter dean, and the chapter dean was going to be out of town. So he introduced a lady to James, and James asked if she would go with the nice lawyer and present in front of the judge. And so you can imagine that they were standing in front of the judge, and the judge looks down at the organist and says, aren't you the organist at my church? What are you doing here? And so she says, well, please, Your Honor, this nasty guy has taken land from the AGO, and it's just... So really it wasn't expected, but the judge gave the land back to the AGO, and we have now sold the land, which has contributed very nicely to our endowment fund. And this thing was just like a John Grisham novel, and we've decided if we can find the budget, we're going to make a movie of it. And James wants Denzel Washington to play him, and I want a bit role as the guy who wants to hunt on the land for free. But I'm just mentioning this because this whole idea of fundraising opens up a completely new world, and it's very interesting. And don't be intimidated. Just remember that people give to people, and build your relationships, and you will have some success. And if you would like to contact me, find my contact details in TAO and send me an email. So thank you very much for listening. I think we're just over time, but we can wrap it up now.
Well, you've proven that there are some very serendipitous experiences that you just don't know you're going to encounter.
Yeah.
And it is about relationship building. And I happen to believe that I think if chapters look within their members or within their volunteers, they'd be able to identify someone who's comfortable in going out and talking, or who would be good to do that. I have no doubt that in each chapter, there's probably someone who would be very comfortable to do that. So John, I want to thank you again for a very lively and entertaining and educational session. And James, thank you for moderating, and thank you to all who attended this.
And Elizabeth, I also had to apologize to Tony, because I really did take some creative license with that last story. And I just need to apologize to him in public, because I don't really want to give the wrong idea. But thank you, Tony, for all your hard work.
Well, thank you again, John. Thank you, James. Thank you to all of our participants. Just a reminder again, as John mentioned in the beginning, on June 14th at 5 p.m., Jeff Verkuylen is going to be speaking about the top 4 things your chapter must do to be financially responsible. This is going to be a great webinar if you have someone who's moving into a treasurer position. And it isn't even just about those that are handling money. I think it's about all of the board officers really understanding what's involved in being what the financial responsibilities are for your chapter. So I encourage you to sign up. The information is already up on our webinars page on our website, and we will look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so very much, everyone. Take care, and we will see you in June.